Ahoy, good morning. How are you today? Yeah, good. So lovely to see you here on day 3 of the festival, maybe day 4. We're so lucky to have with us Claudia Hammond. Claudia is a broadcaster, an author, and a lecturer in psychology. And what's so fantastic about Claudia is she's a brilliant science communicator. And what she does is she takes a deep dive into evidence-based research, distills it all, and makes it really easy for us to apply it to our lives in ways that are meaningful and useful to us. And so she does a brilliant job with that. Thank you so much. And Claudia is a presenter of a number of podcasts and shows, including All in the Mind on Radio 4 and Health Check for the BBC World Service. She's in demand all over the world as a speaker and presenter, and she's here with us in the Czech Republic at this brilliant festival in Ostrava. Claudia is also the author of 5 books. We're going to be talking about her most recent book, which is here, The Keys to Kindness. And one of the things I loved about reading the book is it's actually a lot more empowering and radical than maybe we always associate kindness with. Claudia is also a lecturer at the University of Sussex, studying psychology, and she works in interdisciplinary teams to create original research into subjects as diverse as rest and kindness, which we'll be talking about. But her books also include studies on emotion, on time, and on money. So please give a huge, warm welcome to the very wonderful Claudia Hammond. Thank you for being here. Okay. Thank you so much. That's a beautifully warm welcome. My name is Juliet Russell, and together with Helen Bagnall, I founded 2 ideas events in the UK, one called Salon London, and the other called Also Festival. So it's lovely to be here, and we love to partner with Meltingpot Forum and Colours of Ostrava. So Claudia, we're going to talk about Laskavost, and can we define kindness? Like, is it a hybrid emotion with things like empathy, compassion, you know, being a nice person or being polite? What's your definition of kindness? Have you found one?
Yeah, it's a good question then. Thank you for your appropriately very kind introduction there.
All true.
Which was very nice, very kind. Yeah, I mean, kindness is a hybrid emotion in a way. In a way, it does encompass all those things. It encompasses compassion for others, empathy for others, a desire to help others. All of those things come into it, and they all cross over in some ways. But there are many sort of definitions, different definitions that academics use. The one I really like is the idea that a kind act is something done with the intention of benefiting someone else. Mm-hmm. And I say the intention there because occasionally, you know, you try and do something you think is kind for somebody that you think they're going to like, and we've all had that experience where you realise that they didn't. You know, you guessed it slightly wrong and they didn't quite like that. But the intention is there to be kind, and the intention is there to benefit that other person, and then that counts as kindness, which can be a huge range of things.
Okay, wonderful. So I'd love to start with a kind of what I felt was quite a radical interpretation, dynamic interpretation of kindness, which you've got a wonderful chapter on heroism. And I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit more on that, because is that something that we associate with kindness, those heroic acts? But for you, that's very much rooted in kindness. So I'd love you to talk about that.
Yeah, when I started working on this subject, I was looking at the range of things that could count as kindness. And it can be tiny things like, you know, somebody making you a cup of tea, or somebody giving you their seat, or those sorts of things. But it can go all the way through to extremes. And so I do consider acts of heroism to also be acts of kindness, to be a form of kindness. And the reason is that those acts of heroism are done with the aim of benefiting other people. I tell the story of a lance corporal in the British Army called Matthew Croucher, and he was fighting in Afghanistan in 2008, and they went into a place where he walked into a tripwire, and it was booby-trapped, and he had 7 seconds to decide what to do before an explosive device went off and exploded, and he knew it would, from his training, that it would send shrapnel everywhere. So he could try running, but he couldn't get far enough away from it, so he knew he'd be hit by the shrapnel anyway. And there were other people there, his colleagues were there. And so in that 7 seconds, he decided what he would do, very, very bravely, was to throw himself on it, to take the impact with his big rucksack, and throw himself on it because that would save his friends, because he thought he was going to be injured anyway. But that was so a very, very brave act. He survived. He was awarded the George Cross for bravery, which is the UK's prize for award, if you like, for the most extreme acts of bravery by the military. And he did survive, and now his rucksack, which didn't survive quite so well, you can see it in the Imperial War Museum, the bits of it, and it's all torn. So it's an extremely brave thing to do, but it was also a kind act, because he was doing that act for the benefits of saving his comrades, of trying to save his others. So I think heroism always, nearly always, involves kindness, because it is to benefit other people, whatever sort of heroism it is. So say a whistleblower who knows that something very dangerous is happening in an organization is blowing the whistle to try to protect other people so that that same thing doesn't happen to them.
So there's two things I'd love to pick up on there. The first is heroism, like in an army situation or anything that's a sort of public duty. There's a training that goes alongside that. So you point out in your book there's a preparedness. A, are heroes outliers? And B, is it something we can train for? And then I'm going to ask the second part of the question.
Yeah. So it's really interesting, this question of whether heroes are outliers. Are they, exceptionally kind? Are they exceptionally altruistic because they do this thing? And what is interesting is that over the years, presenting my various BBC programmes, I've interviewed quite a few people who've been heroic, who have been in this situation, like the Matthew Croucher I've interviewed, but also who have, say, jumped onto railway tracks when someone's fallen onto the railway track, but who's lying down fallen, and they've gone on the track to try to get them off before the train comes past. Very, very brave thing to do. And all of them say afterwards, and research backs this up as well, oh, anyone would have done it. This wasn't special. Anyone would do this. It's just I happened to be in the right place at the right moment, and so I did it. And yet we know in many of those situations, not everyone would do it. Not everyone would jump off the railway platform, but that one person did do it. But when you look at, people have tried looking at their personalities to try to work out, well, what is special about these people? They're not different in a way. What's different is they decided to act on that particular day, but their personalities don't hugely differ from other people's, apart from them being kind, which many people are.
Lovely. And I wondered, also, there's a great word in Czech for heroism, which is hrdinství. Is that right? Hrdinství. Such a good word. And Laskavost for kindness. So hrdinství is laskavost, but kind of in a more life-changing way, maybe.
It's extreme kindness in a way, and
Yeah.
and heroism hasn't got to be. Often medals are given for physical bravery. It hasn't got to be that. It can be something civil. There are different categories of heroism. It can be civil, like the example of the whistleblower, or it could be social. So often. Men, for example, win more military medals, and there are more men in general, on average, in the armed forces as well. But more women, for example, donate kidneys to strangers. And that's also a very heroic, I think, thing to do. And it's an example that sometimes gets called extreme altruism. And those extreme altruists do seem to be slightly different people. And one of the things that neuroscientists have found is that there's this area deep inside the brain, this sort of walnut-shaped area, sometimes referred to as the seat of all emotions, but it's not the seat of all emotions, but emotions like fear very much are processed by it, called the amygdala, that you might have heard of. And people who are extreme altruists seem to have a slightly larger amygdala than those who aren't. And of course, we don't know if that develops over time as they become kinder and kinder, but they will often say they feel compelled to do these really kind things.
That's interesting, isn't it? And I love in the book that you expand our definition of heroism. And like you say, there's obviously military or public service. There's also the social aspect of it and the civil aspect. And do you think heroism and things like kindness have become quite gendered emotions, as in kindness feels quite soft and it's like, oh, almost being in service of someone at your own detriment, maybe even the other side is people-pleasing, whereas heroism is seen as dynamic, but yet they're all really parts of the same. And it's quite, I found your definitions of kindness quite empowering, and I love the fact you've kind of given us this new dimension to kindness in the book.
Yeah, in a way, I'd like to reclaim the word kindness, because I think, we all know kindness is a good thing, a positive thing, but it can often be seen as something that is soft and something that is weak, when it isn't. It can be very, very difficult, to donate a kidney to somebody. That's not a soft, weak thing to do. That is a brave, powerful thing to do. And it has this reputation, and I think it can be sort of confused with niceness and be seen as being too nice, and sometimes be seen as something that might make you weak, and that you'll be weak if you're too kind. And the evidence just doesn't show that at all. There is plenty of evidence showing that very successful people are kind. And there is a whole branch of psychology, organizational psychology, that is about psychology in the workplace and in organizations. And I think it's really interesting that the work on leadership there, on what is essentially kind leadership, the field gets called ethical leadership instead, almost as if that's a more palatable word, and that organizations might think, well, we don't want to train people to be kind. We don't really want to encourage that sort of soft behavior, or everyone will start taking advantage of us. But if you look at the list of what ethical leadership consists of, it's all the same things as kindness. And it's not necessarily easy either.
Yeah, and I think that's another really original part of the book, is that you show us, it can give you sort of purpose. Clarity can give, kindness can give you purpose. But also that kindness in leadership is almost seen as a hangover from the 80s, money is important. And that kindness is actually a feature of leadership. And could you talk to us maybe about how we can recognize that culturally in our workplace, but also how we can sort of marry dynamism and kindness in a leadership role?
Yeah, so there is plenty of evidence that kind leaders are more successful leaders. So there's a psychometrician in the US, so somebody who uses psychometric testing, long questionnaires, and he's called Joe Folkman. And he did a study where he took the results from 250,000 people, and they were looking at organizations where people had given 360-degree feedback of their bosses. So this is where you write down what you think about your boss, rather than them saying what they think about you. You put what you think about them. And they got people to rate their bosses on various things. And then they looked at how effective these leaders were. And they found that it was so rare for a boss who was rated as mean rather than kind to be successful and effective, that actually there was a 1 in 2,000 chance of an effective boss being a mean boss rather than a kind boss. So this idea that the kind of, you're fired, tough line of leadership is successful is just not borne out by the evidence. And it doesn't mean either that kind leadership is a soft way of leading. In fact, it can be really hard. So if you imagine a situation where there's one person at work who's really slacking, who's not doing their fair share of the work, and everyone else has to pick up the work, what should a kind boss do? So you could say, oh, well, they should leave them alone. If they don't want to work really hard, what's really the harm of it? Leave them alone and let them get on with it. Otherwise, it might be mean to point out that they're not doing their fair share of the work. But that's not kind to everyone else who is picking up their work. That's unkind to the others. So the kind boss needs to have a conversation with that person to find out why they're slacking. Is it that they don't enjoy this job? Is there a different role they might enjoy more? Should they be moving to something different? Is it that they're nervous about it, that they don't know how to do it? Do they need some more support, some more training? What is actually going on there? They need to find that out. And that's a really difficult conversation to have. And this is why I think kindness isn't a soft option, because that's really hard. And many leaders don't get round to doing that. It's easier just to leave them to get on with it. So kind leadership is not soft leadership at all. But in answer to your question about seeing kindness at work, I mean, when you start looking for kindness around you, you will see it all the time at work. And in fact, there are things people do that they call in psychology organizational citizenship behaviors. And this is things like, I don't know, watering the plants or putting more paper in the printer if you've just used it all up, or going and finding some more milk for the fridge. Just noticing the things that are around that make the place work nicely, or arranging leaving dues for people, or nice things for people's birthdays. Thinking of those things and noticing those. So they call them organizational citizenship behaviors. And in a way, these are little moments of group kindness, of being kind to everyone else to make your workplace better for all of you. And when people stop doing those, and stop doing those kind things, they are then actually much more likely to leave within the next 6 months. And it's actually a kind of early warning signal that something is not quite right and that people are unhappy in their workplace if those things stop being done. Because we know once people are bitter and annoyed perhaps at the way management has treated them, the first thing that happens is they stop doing those little kindnesses. Because they think, well, I'm not going the extra mile. I'm doing nothing extra if I don't have to.
Yeah, that's interesting. And actually, Claudia talking about noticing kindness, when I first started reading Claudia's book, I did, even though I think I'm generally quite tuned into what's going on around me, on public transport, I noticed a lot of acts of kindness. And actually, even tuning into kindness, you become very aware of it. And actually, it makes you feel, or it makes you witness the really positive side of humanity, and especially in very busy spaces, like when you're traveling in quite cramped conditions or people are very busy and fast, to notice it even in those circumstances was very life-affirming. So I really, really enjoyed that.
Yeah, and actually on that, so I talk about the 7 keys to kindness and also all sorts of tips for how to be kinder, how to make the world a kinder place. And one of them is becoming like a kindness twitcher. So like keen bird watchers sometimes get called twitchers, and they're looking out for birds all the time. But looking out for those moments of kindness is really powerful. And I mean, I've noticed loads of them here. Ostrava seems to me a very kind festival, I must say.
Yeah.
I've noticed people giving up, giving seats to people, rushing up and giving a chair to someone who's pregnant. Yesterday, we were lucky enough to climb, to go up the Bolt Tower, which if you haven't been up, oh my word, it's amazing.
It is amazing.
I think it is one of the best towers I've ever been up anywhere. And on one of the layers, I walked all the way down the steps, and on one of the layers I was taking a photo, but from quite a distance, and somebody just came around the corner into the photo at that moment, but quite far away from me, and he ducked straight back around the corner and just waited. He couldn't see me by then to know if I'd finished or not, but just waited and waited until he saw me again to not spoil my photograph, which in a place where there are this many thousands of people, it's very hard not to spoil people's photographs. So it was just a really kind thing to do. And the great thing is, I used to, when I was writing the book, I kept a diary of the kind moments that I witnessed. And I don't write them down anymore, but you cannot stop noticing when you start. Once you start noticing, you can't stop. So I carry on noticing them. And you said it's kind of life-affirming to do it. And the reason it is so powerful, and in our research we found that people who notice more acts of kindness also have higher levels of well-being. And one of the reasons it's so powerful is that it does counter some of the negative things you see about humanity. And of course, I'm not going to deny there's all sorts of cruelty going on in the world. But we know from loads of psychological research that there's a negativity bias. So we notice the negative things more. And we need to, because if you're walking down the street and there's a kitten walking along behind you, that's fine. If you're walking along the street and there's a lion walking behind you, you need to notice that. So you need to notice those negative things. But we're very primed to do it. So if you show people a photograph of a massive crowd and there's one angry face and there's one happy face, people are much faster at spotting the angry face. So we're primed to notice the negative things, and we need to be in order to survive. The trouble with that is that then we notice and remember the negative things, say when we're watching the news and there is a lot of misery happening and taking place. There's a lot of misery on the news, and we notice those things and we remember those things. and it's hard to notice that there are good things as well, and that most people are being nice and doing their best most of the time. Most people are really kind. And by noticing those moments of kindness, it starts to counter some of the negative things that we see, and that's why it can be so powerful.
Yeah, yeah, that's definitely my experience of it. Actually, when I was at Bolt Tower, Helen and I were taking a picture, and a man jumped in the middle. And he was in our photo, but it was still kind.
Was that kind?
It was because it was really funny. So it made us both laugh, and he's like, so it's still one of my favourite photographs from Ostrava. So you talked about your book. So the keys to kindness, Claudia's written 7 different keys to kindness, and it's brilliantly, and there's a kind of blueprint for how we can apply it as we go through the book. But just to say, I will be selling the books side of stage if you'd like to buy one afterwards. And it does really support authors and public speakers when you do buy the book. So if you like what you've heard, please come and talk to us afterwards. So what's another brilliant facet of your work is it's always underpinned by thorough research. And with the REST test and with the kindness test, you were part of a multidisciplinary team to really find out more about kindness. So could you talk to us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so the kindness test was a piece of online research that was led by a colleague of mine at the University of Sussex in the south of England. He's called Professor Robin Banerjee. I think of him as the professor of kindness, and he is very, very kind himself. And he and a group of us created what we called the kindness test. So it was an online study that took 30 to 40 minutes to fill in with all sorts of questions about all sorts of aspects of kindness. But we also looked at measures of people's personality. We used a scale to measure their well-being. We looked at all sorts of different things. And we launched it on the 2 BBC radio shows and podcasts that I present. So particularly the World Service reaches 79 million people each week. So we had a big audience to go to. And 60,000 people were kind enough to take part in the research, which makes it the largest a study of this kind. And it's a snapshot in time because we can't follow people over time, so we can't say one thing causes this. But what we can do is to really see what people think about what kindness is, what sorts of kind acts people are doing for other people, who is kinder, who might be less kind. And people, although they're filling it in themselves, were really honest about that. We asked, you know, of these kind acts, which of these do you do? And people were really honest about saying the ones they don't do. So it's not thus that everybody claims to be kind. You get a real range of how kind people are, which allows you to then look at different things to try to work out who is kind and why.
And there's from respondents from 144 different countries. Were there any cultural differences between countries, or is this kind of a very much... Because I know in your book you talk about cooperation being a key facet of human society. So was that kind of across the board, pretty much across countries?
Yeah, I mean, the good news is that there was a lot of kindness going on. There's a lot of kindness out there. You know, we asked people when they'd received the last act of kindness. 59% of people had received an act of kindness within the last 24 hours. And for a quarter of those, it was within the last hour. So the good news was there was loads of kindness going on, and that applied everywhere. We grouped places by continent because not all countries, although people answer from lots of countries, you need a big sample from each country to really make country-to-country comparisons. But, so some of it we compared by continents. And people noticed acts of kindness more. People were almost equally kind in different places, but people noticed acts of kindness more in Africa, which was interesting. People noticed acts of kindness more in Europe and the UK than in America. And the biggest difference actually was on what stopped people being kinder, the barriers to kindness. So we asked people, what stops you being as kind as you might like to? And in the United States, the most common answer people gave was that social media stopped people being kinder. In Europe and in the UK, the biggest thing people said was fear of being misinterpreted. followed by not having enough time to be as kind as they would like to. So people might say, for example, want to volunteer, but they can't, along with needing to work a lot and look after kids and do all sorts of different things. But the misinterpretation one, I think, is really interesting, because I think sometimes we're not kind, don't go out of our way to say be kind to strangers, not because we don't want to and we don't notice the situation, but because we're not quite sure whether to, and we're a bit embarrassed, basically. And that came out high in Europe and in the UK. And when I was keeping my kindness diary, I kind of noticed this in myself sometimes, that I would be a hesitant helper, that I'd notice that something might be useful to somebody, and then not actually do it. I remember one time I was running along and I saw a couple who were struggling to get a huge king-size mattress out of a van. And because I was literally running, I had nothing with me and was wearing running shoes, so I thought I could help them. I was quite far away when I first saw them. And then I thought, will they mind if I offered the help? It was a man and a woman, and I thought, will the woman think that I think she can't carry it? I started overthinking this. And then by the time I got there, they'd gone inside a gate, and it was a big high gate. And so in order to offer help, I'd have had to go and step into their garden to ask to help, and that felt too intrusive, and then I didn't help and went off in case I was, had got the situation wrong, in case they didn't want my help. And one thing that has really changed for me in doing this research and writing the book is that now I try, particularly if it's strangers, not to worry too much about looking stupid, because I'm not going to see them again. It's not the end of the world. Sometimes I look stupid, get over it. It's okay. And so recently when I was running, there was a guy in London, as in lots of places, there's lots of electric bikes that you can hire, and you can leave them where you like. And sometimes people leave them not so kindly right across the pavement. And there was a man trying to drive into a garage. And I ran past, and I wasn't sure why he'd stopped in the middle of the road, and then realised it was because there was this bike there. And I thought, shall I turn around and go back and help? And then I thought, oh, I'm going to look silly because I didn't notice this fast enough, and I've actually stopped and turned round. And then I thought, well, this is ridiculous. Would he rather I helped or didn't? So I'm going to turn around and help. Then I realised how really heavy those bikes are to try and drag along the ground. But and he was really pleased, and he sort of thanked me nicely, and he felt good. I felt good. We all felt good, because there's lots of evidence that kindness makes you, the giver, feel good too.
Yes, lots of win-win in being kind, which we'll come to. So one thing I also want to say is we are going to open up to questions. So if you've got questions as we go, please do hold on to them, and then we'll come to you in about 10 minutes' time. What it sounded like in your book, and I love that you were so honest about your resistance in certain situations to being kind and looking at that. And it struck me as there was a correlation between how soldiers train for duty, as an example, but how we can also train ourselves for more bravery, even in a small way, how to be more kind. And I wonder if you could talk to us about that.
Yeah, so just as that soldier, Matthew Croucher, that I said about, he put, in those 7 seconds, he thought about his training and what he could do. And the rest of us, we haven't got this training of how to do this. But there is, there's a movement that's been led by a psychologist to try to encourage us all to have a heroic imagination, if you like, to think that, well, if a situation comes along, then maybe I will be the one to be heroic. And there was some research done suggesting, this was back in 1969, suggesting there are an average of 5 or 6 moments of emergencies in your life where you may have a chance to intervene and you may not. And so at the extreme end with heroism is to notice those and to decide, well, the next time, what is the sort of thing I could do? If some people are having a fight, if there's some men having a fight, I don't believe I can physically break up that fight. I've just no idea how to do it, and I'll just get hit, and I don't know what to do. But could I go to a safe distance and video it and make it clear I'm videoing it? Or would that be too dangerous? But could I go to a safe distance and phone the police and tell some other people around me, we need to do something about this? Could I get some other people to come and help? It's worth thinking in advance, what is it that I could do to help? What would I be prepared to do, and what could I do to help in that situation? But it doesn't have to be the heroic situations. It can be these much smaller ones, like my decision. well, I'm not going to worry about looking stupid. We can decide, I'm going to look out for those moments, and next time I think somebody might need some help, I'm going to offer that help. Now, of course, you should never force help on somebody. And I do have a friend who's blind, and he says that and he has a white stick, and he says he barely dare stand on a street corner where there's a pedestrian crossing because people drag him across the road, and he didn't want to go that way, and then he has to wait for someone to drag him back again the other way. So he says, always ask, and I think that's a very good tip for kindness in general, is to ask, would you like help with this? I'm going to, if I helped you in this way, would that be a good way to help you?
Yeah, and actually it's giving people still having their agency within the situation rather than making a big assumption there, which is great. You touched on this earlier, and looking at, I think sometimes there can be a perception of being critical of people's motivation around kindness. So I wonder if you could talk to us a bit about motivation and whether, if we are being altruistic truly, or even if there's a gain for us, is that wrong, or does that detract from kindness in any way?
Yes, it's a really interesting question, this one, because there is a lot of evidence that kindness is good for us and that kindness benefits us. So if you put people in a brain scanner and you give them some money beforehand, and then you give them the chance to give that away to charities of their choice while they're in the brain scanner, you can have them appear on a screen in front of them, ask them if they'd like to give it and how much, and you can see the reward systems of the brain will be activated by that. So our brains reward us for being kind, and that makes sense from an evolutionary perspective, because humans have survived for a very long time by cooperating. You know, for everything we do, the amount of cooperation that's gone into this festival, and the amount of specialization. You know, humans have specialized, and there's, you know, some people are singing, some people are doing the lighting, there's some people are sorting the security out. There's all sorts of things going on here, and there's all this cooperation, and that helps us to survive. And so it's not surprising that our brains reward us for being kind and cooperating, because that is making the world go round. So the problem comes, if you like, when you ask, well, if I do a good act and then that increases my well-being, does that mean it wasn't a good act after all? And for those of you who are fans of Friends, the sitcom, there's a whole episode where Phoebe in Friends tries to do a selfless act of kindness, and every time she tries to do it, she ends up benefiting herself. And we know there's good evidence that people who volunteer, say, on average live longer in the end, even if you take into account their state of health, because obviously if you're already ill when you're older, it's hard to volunteer. So there are these benefits. So does that take away from the virtue, if you like, of being kind? And I don't think it does. Some people would disagree with me, but I don't think we should get too hung up on motives, because if we do, there is a risk that then people might think, well, I won't do that because people will think I'm just doing that to show off. Sometimes it's called tainted altruism, and you sometimes see people criticizing celebrities, say, for supporting a charity very openly, or giving a lot of money to a charity, and people saying, oh, they're just doing that for publicity to look good. But at least they're doing it, and we don't know that they're not secretly giving a load more elsewhere or to that charity, because that's in secret, so we wouldn't know. And if we want people to do more kind things, then I think the last thing we should do is criticize people when they're being kind. And it doesn't matter if they benefit and the receiver benefits, if it's done with that authentic intention of helping the other person, which goes back to that original definition of kindness as being something that you do because it benefits another person.
Mm-hmm. Lovely, thank you so much. Have we got time for a bit of audience participation before we go to questions? Yeah.
I mean, one of the things that we asked people was to write down for us what the most recent kind thing that somebody did for them was, or what the most recent kind act, however small, was that they did for someone else. And people wrote these down, and 60,000 people took part, and they answered these 2 questions. So we have 120,000 moments of kindness, and they're really lovely. And I wondered whether anyone here would like to share what was the last kind thing someone did for you, or the last kind thing you did for someone else. And if you put your hand up, we will send the mic to you. Someone tell us a kind thing.
Yeah.
Oh, we have someone here.
Great. Thank you.
That's very kind of you to be first.
It was only a small thing, but I was wandering around and I was a little bit lost and I didn't know where to go. And a nice guide came and showed me the way and came with me and made sure I knew where I was and then came back again with me.
Yeah, so a nice small moment of kindness here.
But it makes you feel very welcome and connected to the people here as well, which is great. Thank you. Hi.
Hi, I just remembered, I don't know if you have been to the concert of Lenny Kravitz yesterday or in the night.
That's excellent.
But, you know, I found myself crying when he reached out to the people, when he went down and he started to hug people and he was not worried about this misinterpretation, I guess, that he wasn't stopped by that. And I just found myself so touched because this never happens nowadays. Everybody is just so afraid of being misinterpreted. And I felt really, really like, wow.
And that's such an interesting example there of witnessing kindness, of what this noticing kindness does for you, that it made you feel this warm feeling of, wow, isn't this lovely, and that you were so moved by that. That's a really lovely example.
And he reached out to these vulnerable people. He hugged an older lady, a child, and a person on a wheelchair. You know, he made this happen for everybody. So I was like, wow.
Yeah, yeah, and the lovely thing to do in front of lots of other people as well.
And I love the fact you can really hear the emotion of the impact of that in your voice. So, yeah, thank you for explaining that so beautifully. Do we have any other acts? Yes, hello. You know, you just need to speak into it, Zan.
We were walking along and a girl fell in front of us, my wife and I. I helped her up, checked that she was all right, and I noticed that on her behind she was completely covered in dust, and I asked my wife, dust with her rather gorgeous bottom, and she was delighted.
Okay.
That's very kind. Getting the dust off someone who's fallen.
Yes, yeah, definitely. Yeah. Any other moments of kindness anyone's experienced recently? Hello, over there on the steps. And thank you for being so kind as to take the microphone to everyone. We appreciate it.
Thank you. So there's some steps just round the corner, and me and my friend were about to sit down, and there was a couple that gave us some paper to sit on, and I remember thinking, like, what a kind thing to do. So yeah. Lovely,
and it's a small but really impactful thing, and I think that's a beautiful takeaway, is that these little moments of us connecting with people actually can make a really big difference to someone's day, how they feel, how much less lonely and more connected they feel as well.
Absolutely. So these may seem like really small things, but they really, really make a difference. And they are things that we can do every day, all the time. And so I have this spreadsheet with these 120 moments of kindness on. And sometimes I do just open that spreadsheet and look through them, because I just notice new ones and just look through them for fun. We need a hobby. And they're really lovely. And they're so lovely and they always make me feel really, really good and more positive about humanity when I look at them. And so for that reason, in the between each chapter in my book, I put a list of a few of the moments that I'd liked. And I was just going to mention a couple, because they're so nice. There's things like, I nearly missed a train, and I got on at the back when my seat was at the front, and the guard carried my suitcase through 8 carriages. Isn't that lovely?
Very lovely.
And things like, knowing that I sing in a choir, a neighbour gave me a full score of Handel's Messiah that she'd found in some old papers. And sometimes there's some that sort of beg a few more questions, like, I gave the pencil back. I'm interested in that. I drove to the beach, and I hate beaches, is another one. And there was one that was, my neighbour lent me 2 AA batteries and a chicken stock cube. I don't know that recipe.
I don't want that soup.
No, yeah. I know. Very odd, that one. And then one was this one makes me laugh. It just said, I made the postman happier. I'm not going to ask any questions about how that was. But some of them are so moving and so generous. There's one that says, where a man says he was walking to the pub, and he was very tired and on a really long walk in the English countryside to a pub. And he'd met some people coming the other way, and when he got to the pub, they had phoned the pub in advance and bought a pint of beer for him on the card. Isn't that lovely?
Really lovely.
So they are so moving and kind, but so so everyday, but are making such a difference. And so I think one of our big takeaways from the kindness test is that kindness really is everywhere, all going on. We just don't necessarily notice it all the time.
Yeah. So a good tip is to, I mean, there's so many tips in the book actually that we could touch on, but I'd love to pass it over to the audience for questions, because Claudia is such a huge knowledge on this subject and is one of the key researchers in it, leading researcher in it. So any questions for Claudia on kindness? You want to get, yes, hello, at the back there, please. Hi.
Thank you very much. I think most of us would assume that empathy was very important for kindness. I've tried to look it up in Czech, empatie, apparently, so I probably said it horribly. But there's two kinds of empathy. There's emotional empathy, which is where you just get someone's feelings, and I think we call it cognitive empathy, where you have more of an intellectual understanding of why people do what they do. So I just wanted to ask, is there a connection between empathy and kindness, and is there any difference or any relative importance of those two kinds?
Yeah, thanks for that question. That's a good question. So one of the keys to kindness that I talk about is seeing things from other people's points of view. And then when you can see things from other people's points of view, that's one way of increasing your empathy for those people. And it's interesting, this idea of the cognitive empathy, the intellectual empathy, and the more emotional empathy. And I think in practice, in real life, they're often both involved in a situation. So if you think of a doctor who's looking after patients, then they, in a way, have both. You know, they are used to the fact that they see the person who they've given bad news to, who maybe is crying in front of them, and they could still feel some emotional empathy for that person, as well as intellectually knowing, well, I know what might be coming down the line for this person, and I know what they might be thinking about. But in different situations, some will take over more than others. So interestingly, medical students start with more empathy and learn to have to turn some of that empathy slightly off, in a way, to have it at the right moments. And so if you take, there's an experiment with fourth-year medical students where if they show them, put them in a brain scanner and show them a picture of a needle going into an arm, they react in the same way to that as a picture of a cotton bud pushing into an arm. Whereas if you get non-doctors to do that, they don't react in the same way. But they've had to suspend a bit of that emotional empathy in order to be able to do what counts as an unpleasant thing to a person, as in, you know, sticking a needle into someone's arm is not usually acceptable and not usually kind, but it is kind if it's going to save them from something. So I think they are both important when it comes to kindness, but seeing things from other people's perspective is a really important part of kindness. And I think I've noticed it as a really interesting theme that's been coming up in so many of the talks I've been to at the conference, that seeing things from trying to see things from other people's points of view might be a way of trying to understand even what's, you know, happening in the world, as well as what's happening with individuals and what's happening, say, with, you know, misinformation, and when people are believing things that are not based on evidence, is to try to understand where they are coming from.
Wonderful, thank you so much, and thank you for your question. Do we have any other questions? Yes. One there, and then one there, please. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a short comment and a question connected with that. In our country, there is a very successful company who started in the 90s in the living room of a family, and now it's internationally recognized company, very successful. And the motto of the founder, a female founder, was always have the second one in the row in mind, meaning who is behind you, meaning like if you are the last one who used the coffee in the coffee machine, will you fill it up, no matter how high you are in the company, and so many examples. And I believe it's one of the reasons the company is so successful, that the awareness and kindness. The question connected with this, do you see, because you work with the companies, do you see leaders becoming more aware of this and seeing this as a road to success?
I think that's such a good question. I think what is interesting is that the study of, like I was saying, this field of ethical leadership, the study of that is increasing. I think that in a way, I think kindness still has a bit of an image problem. So I think that some companies are embracing this, and I think some are still wary and suspicious. And I think some are wary that if leaders are too kind, that they think people will not work hard. And in fact, we know that in kind organisations, people are much likely to stay longer in their jobs, and particularly at times like at the moment where there is, it's hard to recruit enough people in many countries, then that's more important than ever, and people will stay in those jobs. But I think that is slowly coming through to companies. I think there's not been. And I think it depends massively on the companies. You know, we know, you know, famously some companies will, you know, time people's breaks and not treat them that kindly and pay them as little as they are allowed to get away with in different countries, whereas others treat them much better. But we know which ones where the staff will stay and where the staff will be loyal.
And also, having heard your talk on rest as well, we know the importance of breaks, so that kind of building in kindness in the way you work with people is so important. Yes, and we had a question down here.
Do we know anything about how kindness changes over the lifespan? So are young children naturally kind, or does it get better or worse as we get older?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question, because of course, if you think of young children, if you think of toddlers, then most people will maybe be thinking of tantrums and toddlers, you know, focusing on themselves and thinking about themselves. But actually, some of my favourite experiments on kindness are with children and toddlers, and they're so sweet. There's one I really love where they get 18-month-year-olds, so really little 18-month-year-olds, and they get an adult who is carrying a pile of magazines and is trying to open a cupboard door, and they can't open the cupboard door because their arms are full of the magazines. And the 18-month-year-old is playing on the floor and can see this, and they see if they will help or not. And actually, more than 90% of the time, the toddler will come up and open the door. And there's videos of it, and they're so sweet. And they sort of puff their chests out with pride at having helped. And it's like they want to be able to help, you know, these little baby Good Samaritans. And then they make it harder, this study. And they make it so that the toddlers are playing with a toy that they know is their favourite toy. And so they have to leave their toy in order to open a cupboard, which is obviously shouldn't be as much fun as playing with a toy. And then they make it even harder. They have to leave the toy and climb over a pile of plastic obstacles to get to the magazines. And still, you know, the numbers go down slightly, but still the vast majority will help. And so I think it's easy to sort of think that, children are just, you know, selfish and interested in themselves, or that teenagers are. But there's been some lovely work done in Canada on children and teenagers, and they asked, say, 8-year-olds and 10-year-olds and 15-year-olds to plan 5 kind acts that they're going to do over the next week. And then at the end of the week, they asked them how many they did. And with the 8-year-olds, they said they would do things like share their pizza with their friend, or help their parents carry the shopping, nice things like that. But some of them were much more sophisticated than the researcher expected. And he found that they would, there was one boy who said he was going to be careful not to mention his own mother too much to his friend, because his friend's mother had died the previous year. Now that's really complex in terms of the child thinking what the other child would be thinking about, how the other child is feeling something different. I mean, shows a lot of empathy. And that these things can happen. Now, of course, we do know from research that teenagers become much more self-conscious and much more inward focused for a while, for a time, and that can make it harder to do these things. But he also found that even with the 15-year-olds, they were doing these kind things a lot of the time. And you were asking about the lifespan generally. I mean, and on average in studies on kindness, it often comes out that people who are older score slightly higher on kindness than, say, people in their 20s. And I think this may be to do with it could be, again, to do with the confidence about the confidence to offer help, kindness, because these kindness scales ask you which of these kind things you would do. So it may be about that. Or that people in their 20s have got more things to be wrestling with, trying to work out exactly what's going on in their own lives, but that people then get kinder. But also those differences aren't big at all. Just as the differences between women score slightly higher than men on kindness scales, but only slightly, a much bigger difference is personality type. So we found that people who scored high on extroversion were more likely to score high on kindness, which again might be to do with them having the confidence to offer to do the kind things, rather than them being sort of innately wanting to do well and be kind somehow, that was easier for them to do somehow.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions? Oh, yes, down here. Hi.
Thank you. When you said that there is a correlation with self-confidence, is there any correlation with your needs being fulfilled? I was thinking, like, it's much easier to be kind towards somebody when your needs have been fulfilled and you have a lot to give from. Is there anything?
Well, that's a really interesting question. So there's a couple of things there. So we looked at well-being and levels of kindness. And this is, as I was saying, it's cross-sectional, so it's a snapshot in time. We're not following people over time. But we found that people who, as well as people who noticed more kindness, having higher levels of well-being, so did people who were kinder have higher levels of well-being. So now you could argue that could come either way around. Is it that their well-being is higher, so as you say, their needs are fulfilled, they're okay, so they're able to be kinder? Is it that they feel better because they go around being kind a lot and that has increased their well-being? It could be, of course, both of those things. It could be working both ways. But we also found that sometimes people with very high levels of distress in their lives, and people who reported, say, a lot of mental health difficulties, also then did score very high on carrying out kind acts themselves. So it's not necessarily that people are not kind if they've not got those needs fulfilled. We also looked at income, and there have been lots of studies as well on how much people give away to charity. And it is the case that people in terms of donations to charity, most of the work on this has been done in the United States. And on average, people give their 2.2% of their salaries away to charity, which is higher than some countries because there's less state provision of some things. So there's a big reliance on philanthropy. And say, the super rich give away 4.4%. So you could say, oh, they're being twice as kind. But of course, they've already got the basics accounted for, so giving a higher proportion away is less difficult than it is. But we saw really high levels of kindness as well among people who would, on very low incomes, who would really be struggling. So I think it's a really interesting question and a really sort of complex one there, but I think it's true that you do need to be in a situation where you are able to be kind, and it's a luxury in a way to be able to say, have the time to be kind to others.
Thank you so much. Great question. Thank you for your lovely questions. We've got time for one more, if anyone wants to ask, and if not, hi, over there on the steps. Thank you. So you've got to run round. Yes, she's. Thank you. I didn't mean you literally had to run, but you asked. Thank you so much.
That's very kind.
Very kind.
Thank you. I was just wondering, in Czech, as you said, it's Laskavost. It's part of the word is laska, which is love. So it's. Just wanted to say that the kindness in Czech is like giving your love to others. Also.
Thank you for explaining that. That's really a beautiful definition.
Isn't that nice?
Yeah,
I like
really
that.
Nice.
Yeah. So this is one thing, and the other one, I was just wondering how is. When you're in a family and mothers are actually kind to the whole family and serving everybody, and I think there is a miss of appreciation in this way, and in this way we also, as a mothers, we don't appreciate ourselves, so we would not see it as a kindness, although we are doing it every day and a lot of moments. So can you see it in the researches that, for example, women are more kind, also in the leadership, if the woman is the leader, is giving more kind, or is there any correlation in this way?
So yeah, so in most studies of kindness, including ours, women tend to score slightly higher in kindness, but still much less than the personality. And they are also tend to score lower on being kind to themselves. So, I do talk a lot about, you know, the importance of being kind to yourself as well. And I think that's particularly important if you're the one doing everything and it's not necessarily being appreciated, and not necessarily being noticed and just seen as part of, oh, well, this is how it is, then I think it is really important, this idea of people being kind to themselves as well, in order not to burn out, and in order to have some peace and well-being for themselves.
And that's a really lovely kind of coming towards the end of the book as well, that kind of remembering to be kind to ourselves as well. And there's a lot in this book, which is a brilliant book, and it's actually, I found it very life-affirming to read, but also quite powerful in how much actual control you have on kindness and the impact you can really make in the world. So if you'd like to buy the book, please do. We'll be speaking, and you can come and speak to Claudia afterwards and get your book signed. I'd like to thank everyone here at Melting Pot Forum for all their support with the events. Thank you so much for everyone and for running around with the microphone. Thank you. Thank you to you, our wonderful audience, and thanks for your great questions and participation. We appreciate it so much. And a huge thank you to the very wonderful Claudia Hammond. Claudia, thank you so much.
Thank you.